Yes, he can.
Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it. Unacceptable by any reason.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
It sure is, and we thank you for your support, and we thank you for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you, and thanks to our friends at the Gatesworth for supporting this program week in and week out, as they always do. Thanks, Gatesworth. Let's meet the panelists who are joining us for this week's discussion. We're starting with the editor-in-chief of the Riverfront Times. She's Sarah Fenske, sitting in for Wendy, who's taking the week off. After serving a 2-week in-house suspension, only kidding, Bill McClellan is back, and we're glad about that. We'll learn more about his travels in a moment. Ray Hartmann is with us, another one of our founders of Donnybrook. Ray, of course, with the St. Louis Magazine, and from St. Louis American and STLmag.com, Alvin, Reid, who I believe is going to kick off this discussion because it was a very unusual development in the city when the circuit attorney announced that there are 28 police officers, or 2% of the force, Alvin, from whom she's not going to take any cases. So these police officers can arrest people, file reports, but she won't prosecute those cases. And it's not entirely clear to the rank and file how you get on that list or get off that list. I got some questions about this.
Oh, I have more than questions. It's a ridiculous stance to take. Now, if you've got a problem with any individual police officer, and for some reason you think there have been repeated instances where you should have a problem with them, you still take their case. And you make it clear to them that I'll take the case, but if I find out you lied, fabricated anything, I'm going to have you in here on charges. I'm going to have your badge. So you can just go out in the street knowing that I'm looking at you. But to not take a report is to say that everything they do is tainted, which is not true. If you're helping the community, you're not. Because the last thing you want to do, especially the black community, is send 28 more cops out there with a chip on their shoulder. Now, maybe there's a problem between the community and officers in many people's eyes, and I think there is. But this does not solve the problem. This is just more questionable antic coming out of the circuit attorney's office downtown. It's just it's unexcusable.
I've got to disagree with Alvin on this. I think the individual circumstances of each of these officers' cases are going to be really interesting when it comes out. But I think this department has had a lot of bad apples, and they've been allowed to sit there festering. And sometimes we learn about these people where they will have a history of misconduct or a history of lying, and nobody has dealt with this. You're saying you don't care if those people are out there testifying after they've been found to be untruthful in the past. If I'm a prosecutor, I want nothing to do with that. And I think if we can end up going through this list a little more categorically, we might well see some officers where there should have been some serious questions a long time ago.
Yeah, well, we don't know what evidence she has, though, Sarah.
That's true.
I mean, it seems like just a couple of months ago that we had this big conference and we had a new mayor and a new U.S. attorney and a new circuit attorney and a new police chief and a new head of the Department of Public Safety, and everybody was going to work together. And instead, Kim Gardner just keeps throwing bombs around. I mean, that Greitens, the police wouldn't investigate Greitens because it's public corruption. And the police said, what? We investigate public corruption? We don't know what she's talking about. And now this list of 28, do you think that she's going to release the names and the charges of whatever they are against the 28?
Well, I think she's got to release the list of names. I think the department needs to have that, even if the general public doesn't immediately get it. And I think at that point, the department should look very closely at what's in these guys' files. And if there is a time for outrage, there may well be a time for outrage on this. I just think we're a little premature here. I mean, when this leaked out today, the circuit attorney's office didn't even have a statement prepared. Your paper published before that, because they obviously weren't expecting this to hit just yet. And so, yeah, maybe she's bungled the roll out of this, but I want to wait and see what she has before I'm ready to say I think this is a bad idea.
I think it feels like a bad idea. I hate to be always hate being in the center. I don't mind friction between the circuit attorney and the police. I think that's healthy for our system. So that part of it doesn't particularly bother me. It seems pretty unfair to just and these 28 officers, it's not like they're being fired from the force. So I guess what do they bother arresting people for if nothing they
just
charge?
be driving around.
Yeah, I mean it makes no sense on the surface to me to do it this way. And in preparing for this, I learned today there's something called a Brady disclosure, and it's got nothing to do with the Brady as in Brady bill, but back to the 60s where it is admissible if an officer has a history of lying or being deceitful, that can be exculpatory to a defendant, and that's fine. In other words, if that's what this is about on a case-by-case basis, that's one thing, because there are some officers. But the blanket 27 or 28 people seems this seems a little.
The Justice Department has rigorous standards and hoops that you have to jump through for a Brady, and she hasn't done that. And look, it's possible there are bad apples. I agree. So what you do is you go to Internal Affairs. We now have a Citizens Review Board. We have the Post Commission. You can file that complaint, or you can file a complaint and adjudicate. But you just can't put someone on a list.
But Charlie, they have put people on this list in the past, and Jennifer Joyce herself had similar lists that she would put people on. The only difference today is that there seems to be a much larger dump where a bunch of people have ended up on this list. And so it's like, let's find out how they ended up on this list. I don't think we can call it a blanket
remember
list.
writing about a young cop that Jennifer Joyce decided she would not take cases from, and it was all very public what the kid had done. It was writing a report, and this all of a sudden 28. It seems like McCarthyism.
All right, let's move on to another topic. Great points, everybody. Sarah, great to have you back. Hope all is going well. And you reported this week, broke a story about Bob McCullough, the St. Louis County District Attorney, prosecuting attorney, who was in Oregon, invited to give a speech. And when he did so, one district attorney and his entire staff walked out because they felt the comments were inappropriate. Tell us about this.
So we got a tip that the Willamette Week, which is sort of the equivalent of the Riverfront Times in the Portland area, although they are Pulitzer Prize winning, so probably a bit more respected than we are at the RFT, that they had broken this story about these district attorneys in Oregon who were very offended by McCullough's remarks. And so we sort of seized on it and were able to break it locally. It's just kind of interesting. On one hand, I get the sense that McCullough feels a little bit, maybe on one hand you could say angry, on the other hand you could say liberated by the fact that he's about to be leaving office. On the other hand, it kind of gives you a sense of some of this conversation I think you hear in pro-law enforcement circles, sometimes in St. Louis, where there's just kind of like, oh, you know what it's like trying to deal with people like this, which was kind of a remark that he's alleged to have made. It maybe plays okay in St. Louis, but these days in the rest of the world, something like that doesn't play well anymore, and he got an awakening to that.
It was pretty jarring to see, and we don't know the specifics of what he said, but keep in mind, this wasn't like a group of black prosecutors that walked out, at least the one picture, and it was multiple prosecutors who fell.
An entire staff.
The entire staff, but I thought it was another one besides this one white prosecutor who walked out, who was really, again, we don't know, so maybe in fairness to McClellan, we don't know the specific. But the point is, he is a little better known outside of St. Louis than I thought he might have been amid prosecutors and his, it certainly validates Wesley Bell's election.
It doesn't entirely, because there was another prosecutor that the Willamette Weekly wrote about who said that he found that McCullough's comments were completely appropriate. So if we don't have the exact comments, how can we sit in judgment of what Bob McCullough said?
Well, to me, it's like, okay, let's say I was invited to speak to some Chamber of Commerce in West County, okay? And I started off with a side, about Washington, D.C., current administration, okay? I'm probably I know going into it, probably 60-40 against me. They wouldn't like that, but we could get on with the business, okay? If the St. Genevieve Chamber of Commerce asked me to speak, I'd go down there and I'd say, like, whatever remarks I make, I'm leaving that out because they're liable to get up and walk out. What did Bob McCullough think he was walking into in Oregon? They didn't want to hear that mess.
Well,
and what did they think Bob McCullough was going to come there and say?
Well, hang on. How about this? This is a theory, and it's rank speculation. But as you know, George Soros and others have funded campaigns to change the district attorneys and prosecuting attorneys around the nation. There's 2,500 of them, and they've already successfully done one in the city, another one in the county, and they're going around, they're trying to remake on issues like cash bail and everything. What if this district attorney and his staff who walked out did so because they were trying to show everybody, hey, we don't like Bob McCullough? Because Bob McCullough is poison in some of these leftist circles.
Well, I think they look at Bob McCullough as a guy who's been in 27 years and sort of a 20th century fella. And in the new, more sensitive 21st century, Bob doesn't play so well.
All right. Hey, Ray, you play well in every century, and we want to ask you.
Apparently, well, I've been around a while.
It's a clumsy transition. Give me a little credit for effort. That's about it. All right.
Showing a little age.
Hey.
The viewers point that out.
Judge Jimmy Edwards, respected around the nation, profiled in People magazine and beyond, is now the public safety director for the city of St. Louis, and he has issued a decree that if you work for the city, you can't write something or speak something on social media that is detrimental to the city or disruptive for the St. Louis workplace. These are city employees. This week, a number of concerned individuals, including a lawmaker, Jamila Nasheed, and her colleague, Bruce Franks, met with him and said, this is not good. We need freedom of speech. Your opinions?
I just reflexively am for freedom of speech, and I am not somebody on the left that jumps on every cause when somebody on the left feels victimized or injured by speech. I think Jimmy Edwards is still a great choice for the job, but I disagree with. To me, on a case-by-case basis, if something is particularly egregious, but it's got to be egregious in a way that's not just left or right political viewpoints. I don't like the idea of some blanket policy that restricts people's expression.
Well, let me be in favor of that. As a 20th century person, the problem is people have no judgment on social media, and rather than trying to be picking through what this guy tweeted and that guy tweeted, especially Jimmy Edwards, Department of Public Safety, you're talking about police officers. And you don't want police officers tweeting stuff that is going to get parts of the community aroused. I think it just makes more sense to say, fellas and ladies, I don't want anybody tweeting.
And you know what? I think just the opposite, because if a police officer says something, let's say it's something that's racist, I would rather have that expression out there so people can see it. I'm not, whether white or black, I'm not saying, but in other words, if you got something to say, I'd rather it was out in the little sunshine and see what it is rather than restrict their freedom to say it.
Well, all right, if you go to the St. Louis Police Association, go to their board and read some of the stuff on there. It's just ridiculous. But,
and it's good that it's out there.
I agree with you that, look, Jimmy Edwards, just like the circuit attorney, tell your police officers, if you're putting something out there that is so inflammatory that I and the chief decide that you're putting yourself, your partner, and other police officers in danger, right or wrong, we're going to take action against you. But I'm not going to forbid you from making a fool of yourself and costing you your badge. I think that is going a little bit far.
Okay, Alvin, well, then you have a little office where you've got 3 or 4 people checking to see, looking at all the tweets and the social, to see if this is offensive or not. It sounds like something from the Communist Party in 1955. Wait a minute, comrade, what about this? Yes, that's right.
Well,
it would just be easier to say, fellas, save me the heartapeache and don't go on social media.
You know what? I remember in the last century, he was for freedom of the...
Well, it's funny. This happened last year when there were protesters in the streets, with their freedom of speech and exclaiming what they wanted to say. And they have the right to do that. And then when the chief said, we own the streets, everyone got on him for that. And when the police banged their batons, people didn't like that.
They shouldn't
have done that. Why?
No.
Freedom of speech.
Let me finish. They should get on him for that. That was in a highly stressful situation. He shouldn't have done it. But at the same time, if you create that board down there, I'll take that job starting at about $65,000.
Yeah.
No, but no, Charlie. To the point. To your point, no one that I know of suggested that the chief in that case, when he, in my view, spoke poorly, didn't have the right. No. In other words,
he lost his job like 2 months later.
He didn't lose over that.
He was the interim chief.
But here's the deal,
wasn't gonna
Charlie.
get that
There's a
job.
difference between restricting someone's right to speak and freeing them of consequences of their speech. I would completely defend his right to make the statements he made, and the idea to whether you're on the right or the left that your expression should be restrained is wrong. I think,
All right.
Do you want to be
very
on
well.
the panel that determines what's offensive and what isn't?
Hey, Bill.
I'm with Alvin. Give me a
All right. Hey, well,
No,
I'm sure we'll be taking phone calls on your turn about this one. Bill McClellan, I want to ask you about the Christopher Columbus statue, which was erected 130 years ago by Henry Shaw in Tower Grove Park. And it's, it's now controversial because this day and age, people are looking back in history and examining the actual records of our heroes. And the Tower Grove Park administrators have said they're going to form a commission that'll include Italian Americans and Black Lives Matter and others, and they're going to decide the fate of this statue based on this great explorer's entire record. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I think it's ludicrous, Charlie. I have this vision. Just remember when the American troops tore down the statue of Saddam Hussein? I can see the new progressives tearing down the statue in front of the art museum of poor St. Louis, who probably is a worse person than poor Columbus. I mean, he was a crusader, and he was anti-Muslim, and he was also anti-Semitic.
St. Louis.
So if we tear down Columbus, we'll be out there hauling down the poor statue of the dear king. I think it's crazy to judge people in one age with our standards who lived in another age.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because in Columbus's age, his atrocities were well documented, and the King and Queen of Spain took away his governorship because he was cutting off people's ears and noses and making women parade in the nude through the streets, and he had all these slaves that he treated poorly.
Okay, let's just cut off his nose on his statue.
Well,
and then
maybe.
the rest of it.
But here's what I'm
That way
saying.
we're even.
Unlike Saddam Hussein, this is not mob rule. Tower Grove Park is looking at this. They're going to form a commission. They're going to study it, and then I guess they'll vote on it, which I think is the way to
I'm with
do
Bill.
it.
I mean, you know what? I'd like to invoke a half-millennium statute of limitations, okay? I mean, come on. I mean, I understand, and maybe I'm being politically incorrect when I say it, but I mean, come on. We can't. I guess Columbus, Ohio needs to rename itself.
They're thinking about it.
Are they? I mean, come on. Look, I think. Well, no, they're going to lose that one as soon as I get it. Maybe we can switch names. My point is this, Charles. I mean, I think it diminishes the real issues of today that have meaning to be talking about this kind
It does.
of stuff.
I agree. There are more
just
important issues. But do you think that people in this century have to walk among all the monuments that were erected in the 19th century?
Well, okay, you asked about
It's
some
history, Charles.
Yeah,
It's
you
it's
asked about it, like maybe a dividing line in time. I would say, okay, America, for us, just ourselves, Americans. Let's 1776. That's when we declared ourselves a country. So we want to examine anything that happened since we became a country. Okay, that includes obviously the Civil War. But folks knocking themselves out for what somebody did in 1492 and afterwards. Come on, Black Lives Matter.
We've
all
all
right.
memorized 1492. It's one of our.
Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Alvin Reid, let's move up to 2018. And
Charlie,
we'll go.
who created that holiday was FDR. The Columbus Day holiday.
Little known fact.
To us.
Alvin Reid, I want to ask you about the convention center and the convention business in downtown St. Louis. It was reported this week that convention business is down 20%, and we've lost some restaurants. Officials say it's kind of the Michael Brown effect because these conventions plan 3, 4, 5 years in advance, and at that time in 2014 they were planning for 2018, and they pulled out. Plus we lost the robotics convention and some others too. So what do you think? why is convention and the convention business down in St. Louis?
Well, that's cop out, okay? If you saw it coming for 4 years, do something about it. And I thought, well, we do them really in advance. And, oh, by the way, the football team was leaving. And remember how when the football team left, we were going to have every convention in the world come into the Dome because now they were out of the way and they hogged the thing the whole season. What happened to that? That's right there along with American Airlines. Greatest thing happened that they bought out the TWA and blah, blah, blah. There's always a reason. You know, hey, if we're not doing a good enough job, then let's get some people that do a better job, and let's quit blaming what happened in Ferguson 4 years ago for all of our problems.
This is what scares me, though, is I'm reading these stories where the convention people are advancing their argument, and what they're trying to say is they need more money. We need to upgrade this convention center. And it's the same stuff that we heard about Scottrade. It's like, you know, everybody keeps coming to the city with their hand out. We don't have the money for this. And now they're saying, oh, to ensure downtown is vital, we need to bring in all these tourists. It's like, where does it end?
Well, we actually probably do need at some point to upgrade to modernize the convention center. And when it was built in '77, it was considered state of the art. When they sold to people like me, the RFT staff wasn't happy with me, back in the early 90s, the idea of expanding the convention center because it was obsolete in 15 years because they didn't have enough exhibit space. And that's how the Dome came about, because it was going to cost $100 million, and that was part of the 260, yada, yada. I don't disagree with Alvin that you can't use this as excuses. I think if we are paying a price for Ferguson, which we will pay, it's probably going to last for 8 or 10 years, really, in terms of that. But to Alvin's point, and I think he's right, we can't use that as an excuse. We have to stand up and we may have to reinvent ourselves as sort of a mid-market destination and recalibrate the kind of conventions we're going for. But I also don't think you can just rule out the idea of modernizing the convention center.
Well, we did put in $40 million in 2012.
Well, I mean,
how much?
but now
in the Ram,
I think I don't know if they need to implode the Dome or what they got to do. But they're gonna have to figure something out. I don't think you can just assume that you don't do anything.
Yeah, it could also be that St. Louis may not be the most attractive place to visit in 2018.
Thank you. Maybe you might want to slow some of them bullets down out there. You know, maybe that would help.
Well, we redesigned the arch. Maybe that'll attract some people. Bill McClellan, I want to ask you about your former boss, Emily Pulitzer. Well, she was the owner of your paper. And she announced this week that she's going to try and remake an entire block of Olive, actually the one next to us here at the 9 Network, and she's going to try and hire 4 internationally renowned architects and let them go crazy by designing some residential structures that'll go for about $400,000. I think this is fantastic news. How about you?
Well, I wish you well. You know, my tastes are not the tastes of Emily Rao Pulitzer. I mean, she's much too avant-garde for me. I'm afraid these new livable developments will be like a pipe, you know, and you'll crawl into it and go, geez, you know, I can almost see the Sarah sculpture from here. Now, I could be wrong, and you know, it's a block that certainly can use development, and if Emily Rao Pulitzer can have, you know, houses that somebody would want to live in built there, good for her.
I'm going to follow up with the Don's comments here. Okay, if you want to do something, how about, hey, St. Louis, how about hire some young, up-and-coming, maybe minority, maybe not, architects and turn them loose to build a house that costs $400,000. You know, God bless you for wanting to help, Emmy, but this is dog and pony.
We've had some great architects working in St. Louis, from Cass Gilbert to, the list goes, Philip Johnson. Why not bring in out-of-towners? Eero Saarinen, that's a good thing, isn't it?
But what to do a block, Olive right down there? I mean, why?
It'll enhance our experience getting to the 9 Network. All right.
I'll yield my time to Sarah.
Well, let's move on. Our final topic of the night includes religion. And Josh Hawley, the Attorney General, Sarah, and the candidate for U.S. Senate, taking on the incumbent Claire McCaskill, apparently said in front of an audience that he would like to eliminate the political restrictions on religious groups. Right now, as a 501c3, you're not supposed to endorse a candidate. How do you feel about that?
I just think it's interesting that any time somebody gets audio of this guy talking when he thinks journalists aren't around, he's always trying to figure out a way to like throw a bone to like this very, very religious group of people. I think it's kind of the common thread that's running through his entire belief system and what he's up to. And I think he would like to see this country kind of go back to how it was in the 60s, and it's going to be interesting.
1860s. I mean, he's a wacko.
Pre-60s. He's very religious.
You know what the ironic thing that hasn't been reported is? One of the worst consequences of completely obliterate the Johnson Amendment, named for Lyndon Johnson, not as president, as a senator back in '54. It's been with us for 74 years. One of the main 64 years. One of the main problems with blurring the distinction with 501c3s, ironically enough, is that churches don't have to report who gives them money. So if you turn churches into active political organizations, you're back to Eric Greitens' dark money.
You want to know something?
I mean, it's just
Ray, I think we're already
outrageous.
there. Like I read in Alvin's St. Louis American about Brendan Kelly appearing April the 15th at a church in East St. Louis with the head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Andrew Cuomo last week spoke in a church. So did Andrew Gillum, who is running for, Senate in Florida. It happens all. Willie Wilson in Chicago is giving out, he's a Democratic candidate for mayor. He's giving out money in churches in Chicago. Churches are already endorsing candidates.
Well, I hear you, but like I said, after Josh Hawley spoke, if they could have gave me 5 minutes, I would have just came up and said, like, you do realize that this would mean that black churches across America could just straight out, in the sermon, tell people who to vote for and put this money in this plate and put this money in that plate, and we'll figure out what's going to and we'll figure out what's going to the building fund and what's going to the candidate fund and all that. And those folks would have said, like, oh no, we can't have that, because they know that black church, the black community, carries a lot.
Black churches de facto endorse candidates when they allow them to appear on Sunday.
I understand that. But if they were all no bars held anymore, that would change everything. Not 10 years ago, it was conservatives that were threatening wanted to take black churches' charters because they had too much political stuff going on.
All right.
Not 10 years ago. But now
10 seconds.
Right.
Anybody? That's it. All right, let's go to the letters and see what people had to say about last week's esteemed program. The airport has been around a long time. If it were an engine of economic development, there would be all kinds of businesses and subdivision built around it. That from Ken Krzyzewski of St. Louis. We also heard from Paul Dribbin of St. Louis, who wrote, the panel missed the most important reason for not expanding Metrolink. The technology is obsolete. Light rail worked in densely populated communities when most people worked downtown. This is not the case in St. Louis. Thanks, Paul, for writing. You can write us, care of KETC, 3655 Olive Street, St. Louis, Missouri, 63108. Don't forget those emails, letters@ketc.org, and those tweets. Hashtag Donnybrook STL, because Alvin and Ray are going to be reading them in just a few moments. Thanks to Sarah Fenske for joining us once again. So good to see you. Wendy will be back next week, and so will the rest of us. But don't touch that dial or go for that clicker, because your turn is next.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.